Hello, I am here and we are going to talk today about Black people and mental health issues. So, welcome and stay tuned because we are getting into our first episode, which is grief, loss, and death. This is episode 1. Stay tuned. Okay, so what is the meaning of grief, bereavement, and mourning? Let's start there. The conventional meanings of grief and bereavement and mourning, and I'm looking at my paper so you'll see the reflection of my computer screen. Let's just do this. Okay, so grief, in terms of just what the definition is, right? The academic or the literal definition with regards to what's in the book, what's in the dictionary, is mental suffering or distress over affliction or loss, sharp sorrow, physical and or mental pain. That's grief. That's what's happening when you are experiencing grief. Okay, bereavement is a period of mourning after a loss, and especially after the death of a loved one. That is the dictionary definition of bereavement, that's the period of mourning. And mourning is the conventional manifestation of sorrow for a person's death. The outward symbols, in other words, of mourning. In other words, why we wear black to funerals, why we wear black to wakes, why people dress up in black when somebody dies. Kind of symbolic. Even things like flags for soldiers, which are symbolic of mourning, and half flying the flag at half mast, and those types of things. There are different things that different cultures and religions do to express mourning. So we just dealt with grief, which is the mental suffering, bereavement, which is the period of mourning, and then mourning, which is kind of the symbolism of sorrow and of death. So, Black people, how do we deal with mourning, grief, loss, death, bereavement? I think sometimes we have a little bit of a different and an extra layer of things. Everybody will feel like their cultures are unique, but we deal with a few things. So I wanted to talk about those things in particular because I'm talking to Black people. If other people are here, welcome. And certainly leave your questions and comments below. And as this continues to grow, we'll do more and do better as I'm starting to learn this. But I can tell you, I'm here for my Black people. That's who I'm here to talk to. So I want to talk first of all about the stages of grief, Black people. And when I say the stages of grief, sometimes we don't necessarily learn those things, but we go through them. We have a history, and particularly if you are African, having an experience in America or in other places, but specifically if you're an African having an experience in America, you may not necessarily have been taught that it's okay necessarily to grieve, to be in bereavement and to be in mourning too long, because sometimes by the time we just finish grieving about this, something else is happening with regards to us. That's why I want to bring this uniquely to us as Black people, talking about mental health issues and starting with grief, because a lot of times we're in grief. We may feel like we're in grief right now for the president that is currently in the White House, who no words. So the stages of grief and loss are in no particular order, but except the last one: anger, denial, depression, bargaining, and the last one is acceptance, because we always ultimately get to acceptance. May not always be easy, but we do get there. So we can go back and forth between the other stages, which are anger, denial, depression, and bargaining. We might go back and forth. We're angry one day, we're depressed the next day, we can't believe it, in denial. Then another day, we're bargaining, oh God, please, don't let this be happening, whatever we're going through. But acceptance is always the last thing. After things kind of run its course, we do get to a point where it may still hurt, but we get to a point where it gets easier, or we accept it and we kind of we're able to move forward. Most of us. There are some cases, in not so unique cases, where people have not gotten accepted, and days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but those are the stages of grief. So if you are experiencing those emotions, with regard to grief and loss can be a different thing. It doesn't always have to come from death. Then just understand that it's normal, it's natural, that you will feel angry, that you will feel like you want to bargain, you want to be in denial, you want to be depressed, and eventually you get to the point of acceptance. Okay, the next one is me telling a story of when I was in college, and I started to learn this because they actually do have a course on grief and bereavement. That's actually what the course was called. I always take everything because I went to a predominantly white university, PWI as we call it, predominantly white institution. And I always was already thinking in my mind, how can I help my black folks out with this? Because we already know they ain't always looking out for us. We got to look out for each other. Just to make a short story shorter, the lady who came to talk in our class, and she was now somebody who went around the country and talked about grief and bereavement based on her experience. And what her experience was that she was literally like a rocket scientist kind of situation. That's literally what her position was. You know, you're a genius, some sort of rocket scientist. Yeah, she was actually a rocket scientist. And she was going home to visit her family. And as she was going home to visit her family, and she was waiting in the airport for them to pick her up, her mother, her father, her sister, and her nephew, who were on their way to the airport, were killed in a car accident. So she's there and she's waiting at the airport, and they don't show up. And she's waiting and wondering what happens. And of course, eventually she gets the tragic news that on their way to pick her up, they were killed in a car, I think a head-on collision, drunk driver situation, and they were killed. And of course, this sent her world spiraling out of control, emotionally, physically, to just have to deal with that. You know, you lose both your parents, you lose your sister and your sister's son, her nephew at the time, and just dealing with that tremendous loss and how it affected her life and how it changed her life. And I think just sharing that story is just to say, tragedy strikes. Most of the time, if we are fortunate, and a lot of us are, we may not experience certain levels of tragedy. But then one person's extreme story may come out like that, and we may have another type of extreme story. So this was this woman's extreme story, and it's tragic, and certainly when she's telling it, you're like, oh my God. And that's a terrible thing that absolutely happened. So obviously for her, just this tremendous grief, right? And this bereavement that was a long period of time. You're burying 4 family members, and then she had to go through this mourning. And then, you know, the mourning, if she was doing the symbolics of just dressing in black. Some people dress in black all the time anyway. Some people just like to do that or call it fashion and all that. I have on a black t-shirt right now. But just what her processes were as she's telling this story, that it changed her life and it got her inspired to go around and have these lectures as a rocket scientist now, talking about grief and bereavement and mourning. And Black people have some unique situations. Interesting for me as I'm looking on this picture to just kind of start remembering these things is that the professor that taught my course on grief and bereavement, she died suddenly, and she was really good at this. That's how she got into it. She started talking to kids and counseling kids about deaths and trying to get them to understand it. And the irony is that she passed away very suddenly. She had issues with her weight, and there was something with some health complications where her weight and her breathing or her heart, things like that kind of collided with her, and she passed away. And this was like after we had this tremendously great class with her. This happened like the following semester or something like that. And it was just another situation when you can think of all of the various situations where you've had to kind of deal with grief and the ironies of grief that you also have to deal with. And again, Black people, we have some special circumstances. And I recall, and if you're not in tune, tune into turnerschurch.com. And also, if you're not looking into The Bubbles and the Bears by Javon Clark, Michael Clark, on Facebook, you should be doing that, because I'm supporting them. I'm part of Turner's Church, not necessarily in some official capacity, but I'm with them. They're rocking for Black people, by Black people, and that's kind of what also motivated me to start sharing some of my gifts, some of my strengths. This is my lane: psychology, sociology, to just get on here and start sharing, and that's what I'm doing. But one of the things that Javon did in his Bubbles and Bears class is that he talked about, bitch, I'm going to die. And why do I say that? Is because we are all going to die. And we shouldn't be afraid of death, but we tend to be afraid, especially when it's out of our controls. And no matter what, ultimately, death is, in a sense, out of our control. But sometimes, especially as Black people, it may be in the hands of somebody else. Our life may be in the hands of a police officer. Our life may be in the hands of a judge. Our life may be in the hands of a jailer, and those specifically in those, our life may be in the hands of some racist that day who decides, they, one or two or three, are driving in the car and want to pick up one of our little girls, or abduct us, or chase us into oncoming traffic, or shoot us while we're trying to go to the store for iced tea and Skittles. So we have that extra thing. And at the same time, we still have to get up every morning and say, bitch, I'm going to die. Because at some point we are. And I always often say to that, put a number on it. If you ain't planning on going nowhere and you want to get your vibration out, which is more of what we'll talk about on this mental health thing, put a number on it. Say, hey, I ain't planning on leaving this earth till I'm 100. And I'm going to be healthy and walking and rolling. And let me go look at some 97-year-olds who are standing up straight, who are strong, who are still working out. I'm going to be here. My vibration, my shield, my superpower, whatever you want to call it, is going to protect me. And hopefully, not even hopefully, and I ain't going to be worried about the other outside things that we have to worry about. Is that realistic? I think it is. For you, you need to call it. Call it, claim it, whatever your religions are. I believe in a spiritual foundation. I am not a Christian. I am not an atheist. I am not agnostic. I believe in a foundation, particularly with regards to people, African people having an origin or ancestral origin back in Africa and having some spiritual foundations that says that we are very powerful people. And there are sometimes these laws that are solidified against us. We have to do more on a mental plane, on an energy level, to make sure that we are safe. There isn't any time limit on grief. Now we're talking about our loved ones. If our mom passed away, or our dad passed away, or a sister, or brother, sibling, a best friend, somebody we care deeply about, a spouse, significant other, husband, wife, significant other, there's no time limit on grief. You want to be able to get up out the bed, get up out the house, live your life. But you have a period, as we talked about, of mourning, of bereavement, where you are mourning the loss of that loved one. A lot of times what we do forget is we forget to celebrate their life, and instead we kind of mourn their death when they had all of this life that they lived, even if it was a beautiful child that you carried for 9 months and they lived 2 months or something like that. Just that whole experience, just those types of things. We oftentimes are much more kind of conditioned to lean towards the bad instead of the good. But there isn't a time limit on it, but you want to, there isn't a time limit on it, period. However, you want to commit to getting up out of the bed every day, if that is your only goal for that day, to begin the process of moving forward, because life doesn't stop. And death, and when I heard a pastor say this, as I said, I'm not really religion, but he said sometimes death is so good for the people who died that they don't come back and tell you about it. And in one way or another, that is to a certain degree true. So recently, and that's just yesterday, over the playoffs this weekend here, at the time that we're watching this, Isaiah Thomas, a basketball player for the Celtics, Boston Celtics, sister was just killed in a car accident, and he decided to play basketball. And what happened was that Charles Barkley, who I am absolutely not a fan of at all on almost any capacity, I think he just needs to shut the hell up, but that's another story. He made the comment that watching Isaiah Thomas express grief before the game, pre-game, and maybe post-game, he did some crying. He had some emotional outbursts. He shouldn't have been there on the court, and it made Charles Barkley uncomfortable. And a lot of people, and I would say black people, chimed in to say, yeah, it made them uncomfortable. And this is where we need to work on ourselves. And I'm saying we as black people. I'm only talking to black people. I'm sure there's other people here, but I'm talking to black people. We are desensitized in a way, and I'll get to that in a minute. In general, across the board, everybody is desensitized to death, but we need to be more empathetic. What does empathetic mean as opposed to apathetic, right? Apathetic, empathetic. Apathetic is unconcerned. Empathetic is concerned. That's kind of the easiest way to think about it, what they mean. We need to be more sympathetic and empathetic to the way somebody has chose to handle their loss. It's an inconvenience for us. Somebody just died. This is the situation, how he wanted to handle it. You all have to put up with a few minutes of discomfort for this man to decide that he wants to handle it the way that he wants to handle it, or the way he thought he could handle it. So what? Do it for a few minutes. It is not going to inconvenience you, but we have gotten to this point where we tend to be very unsympathetic and apathetic to people's pain. And this is how he wanted to come out, maybe to pay tribute to his sister, whatever the case may be. It might not have been the right decision, but it was the decision he made at the time that we all in the present moment had to experience with him, understanding that his sister died. She was killed in a car accident. And for us to make it about us and say, oh, well, doesn't make me comfortable. I don't want to see him on the basketball court crying. This is a natural function of having somebody you love die. And we need to get with the program on that, because we as black people, having people die that we don't know and we feel, for Trayvon Martin, for Tamir Rice, who shouldn't be dead. And we can't understand and empathize when somebody's family members die, and it makes us uncomfortable. Get comfortable with those types of things. These are the types of things in terms of for our own mental health, beginning to remember how to compartmentalize and not do it according to how the white man has taught us to be like them, and we can never be like them. So it's just kind of understanding or having another point of view. Same thing with the Cleveland shooter. That's also something that happened over this weekend. We have some psycho running around, killing people at random, killed an old man on camera. Facebook ran it because that's how they do black people. And people were like, don't show that, don't show that, don't show that. Those types of things. It's true. That was a sense right there where we didn't have to watch this. This wasn't something that we needed to be privy to. This was some psychotic person wanting to put evil on display. And we, again, how we decided to approach it, or rather how the white man first decided to approach it, because he put that on Facebook and kept it on Facebook all day. Whereas when the white cameraman and white reporter got shot on Facebook, what was that, 2 years ago, a year or 2 years ago, that was off Facebook right away. So they looped when black people get killed, and then when white people get killed, we don't see it no more. So it's also, remember, there's these types of mechanisms. Now we're talking about our grief, but also just not forgetting that these types of things happen as well. And also, we already know we're dealing with in the world. We are dealing with a very destructive presidential dynamic going on right now. They bombed just to bomb in the Middle East, to get rid of a bomb, a big giant non-atomic but close enough bomb this weekend, and bombed these people in the Middle East. I don't do the black and brown thing anymore the way I used to, where I'd be like, oh, they hurting black and brown folks. I'm letting brown folks talk for themselves, because when we are on the spectrum and things are black and white, a lot of times this is us, this is white, black, white, and then the people that are supposed to be in the middle, You know that line you have? They most of the time they're a little bit closer to over here. We kind of standing up by ourselves. So I'm stopping with all of that black and brown stuff. Again, you can have sympathy, you can have harmony on a case by case basis, but understanding that in general we are being conditioned and brainwashed to be desensitized to death in a lot of ways, and we need to instead compartmentalize what is meaningful and what is not, and for the most part get away from watching death and destruction, particularly with regard to Black people, because we understand that a lot of times in some way, shape, or form we are grieving and bereaving and mourning in some capacity because of what we deal with here in the United States or other places, but particularly as an African having an experience in this white supremacy society. I know this is real different, but I want you all to kind of get that there is some overlap in terms of how we deal with grief. Now let's talk right quick about Black people and murdered by cops and murdered by racists, and and the lynchings and all these things that we never were afforded the luxury of dealing with, and we continue to get no justice. We continue to watch a little boy get killed on tape, the injustice behind people getting killed. Later on it comes out what we initially knew or said, that the cop was lying, all of these types of things, and that there was no justice. We grieve, we mourn, we are bereaved. All three of those. As I said, sometimes there's some overlap. And we are allowed to kind of do that, but we have to kind of get ourselves up and brush ourselves off and keep going. And so in understanding that, understand first of all that your mental health is important. That it's okay to grieve your losses, your pain, your suffering. But you want to make sure that, again, these are the things that we do need to kind of compartmentalize without it being a subconscious and unconscious suppression. And in that way, it means like holding on to the pain. Let the pain out. Let people know I'm mad, I'm angry. We already see people end up doing that in the streets, but a lot of times we get to the point where we continue to do that almost on autopilot, and we just think that that's the next best thing to do, when a lot of times we do need to have those moments when we get in a circle together and say, we are grieving, we are mourning, and create the energy and the power that can come from that. And then let that motivate us in terms of how we march, how we protest, how we stand up against the injustices that create this grief that Black people continually have. Because we are definitely the people that can look at postcards of hangings and lynchings and all the other stuff and all the other injustices that we have never gotten any sort of remedy for, and still have to deal with the pain of those things. That's all I got. That's good. Okay. Hopefully that was helpful to people. And I'm learning. This is kind of rough around the edges. This is my first episode, but I'm ready for this. I'm really ready for this. I have a lot of topics coming up. So this was the first episode, and I'm really glad that we got a chance to do it. And this is Black People and Mental Health, episode number 1, Grief, Loss, and Death. And I will see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.